cyclicality is such an important aspect of the feminine, that death and rebirth process that we move through as women. And for me, that's the process of alchemy. We actually get to experience that in a physical way every single month through our menstrual cycle. And we've all been conditioned into this societal framework that is not built for a cyclical body. Right. It's built for a 24-hour cycle, which is what a male's hormonal cycle looks like. Really living in a feminine-oriented way really requires us to understand and embody the cyclical nature of the feminine. And so it's such an important piece for so many women to really reclaim.
Hello and welcome to Curious Ones podcast by Yandara. I'm Yael Ginsberg, the host of the podcast, a yoga and meditation teacher and philosophy lover. Each week you will hear eye-opening interviews with the different teachers of the Yandara Yoga Institute located in beautiful Baja, Mexico, along with other teachers that pass through here. This life-changing knowledge shared through authentic, heartfelt communication will help you live a happier, more fulfilled, and connected life. Let's dive in. Hello, welcome back to Curious Ones podcast by Yandara. I'm Yael Ginsberg, and today I have a special guest. She works through astrology, herbalism, and alchemy, helping women reconnect to their most authentic self. She is the founder of Rewild the Soul, which is her really way to connect to the world. Welcome to the podcast, Hannah Schultz.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I'm so happy you're here. I met you just, let's say, like a week ago here. You gave a class during the teacher training that is going on, and I just thought the information is something that should reach every single woman in the world. So let's just dive in. Let's start from maybe introducing a little bit the work that you do and why you started working in this field.
Yeah, totally. So I guess a little bit about the work that I do is I host retreats as well as working with women in a one-on-one setting and some group settings online. And my passion for starting this work came from my own kind of healing journey and really self-discovery journey. And so much of that journey for me required peeling back a lot of layers of conditioning, societal conditioning, and so many other pieces. And so a big part of that journey was my studies in herbal medicine. And I really help women connect to their most authentic selves. And I found that for most women, underneath a lot of that conditioning, programming, family patterning, or wounding, there is an authentic feminine core essence. And I love helping women reconnect with that essence. But I also find it's important for women to integrate and balance their inner masculine, really have a safe and healthy container to hold that feminine essence. And the class that you attended about last week, about our cycles as women and how to really reclaim and reconnect to our cycles, it's a topic that I'm so passionate about. I teach it on almost all of my retreats and weave it into my work with all of my clients, because I think that really living in a feminine-oriented way really requires us to understand and embody the cyclical nature of the feminine. And a huge aspect of that cyclical nature is our biology and our body chemistry. You know, as women, we have this 29 roughly day hormonal cycle that men don't experience. And I think that most of our world and our society is not really designed to support that cyclical nature of the feminine. And so it's such an important piece for so many women to really reclaim.
I really want to go into that, how we start to get to know our cycle and what we're supposed to do in each stage. And before that, I would love also to hear about that piece about integrating the masculine, because I think that's something that has been showing up for me in a lot of different settings about how women are out of balance with the masculine and feminine energies. So how do you approach that? What does that mean?
Yeah, great question. So what I've noticed with most of my clients and even myself in my own journey is that as we embark on that process of reclaiming our feminine essence, we can really do a full pendulum swing. So most women, if they've been operating out of a more kind of hyper masculine place, which most people are operating out of, I would say, a wounded masculine energy. That's kind of our Western society is operating out of this place of the expectation of perpetual production, forward movement, go, 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 go. Your value is based on your productivity. All of these kind of things for me are a wounded expression of masculine energy. And so all of us have that conditioning, right? If we grew up in like a Western world and environment. And so a lot of women tend to begin to embark on this journey, this healing journey, and reclaiming their authentic self, and maybe do a bit of a full pendulum swing. And what I've found about masculine and feminine energies, and these are not gendered energies, we all have both. But what I found is that the feminine really thrives within the healthy containment of the masculine. And so we can see this within nature, right? Or even within our spiritual practice. Like I would consider the masculine or the Shiva as the atmosphere, the pure consciousness, right? Whereas the feminine is the Shakti. It's the movement within that pure consciousness. It's all of what we see as living and moving and expanding kind of creatures on this planet. And so all of that thrives within the containment of the masculine energy. So what I found is that when women haven't integrated the masculine in a healthy way, there can be a full pendulum swing to try to go into that feminine energy. And typically what ends up happening if there's not that healthy containment is that it can come out as like more of a wounded expression of feminine energy. So it could be chaotic, it could be like emotionally just kind of chaotic. It feels like that Shakti energy without the healthy Shiva container. And so it can feel like a lot of movement or a lot of emotions or a lot of things coming up, and a lot of flow. And maybe it's just like, oh, we're going with the flow. We're doing this, we're doing that. But there's not like structure and support and integrity and responsibility and like those healthy masculine pieces to hold it. So it's actually typically I try to work with women first on healing and integrating their masculine and bringing that energy into balance and into a healthy expression. We do that through discipline, through structure, through integrity, through building commitments with ourselves, building trust with ourselves, building discernment into our lives. Like these are all kind of qualities that I would consider a part of the healthy masculine.
Wow, I resonate so much with what you're saying because it is very true. Like I think I can speak for myself, but I think everybody listening can recognize these places of the wounded masculine and the wounded feminine. And really how important it is to have the healthy combination of both. I mean, you can see it in outer expressions, like a woman and a man, let's say in a conventional relationship. And then in that way, you can maybe understand better the dynamics that are actually going on inside each one of us. And when we're speaking with the perspective of women, and living in a society that is very much masculine oriented, how important it is to find that balance.
Yes, totally.
So that was really it moved me, like touched me deeply in the truth of needing the containment, the masculine, in order for the feminine to thrive.
Yes, because the feminine, I found, when we kind of strip away the layers of like the false masculine or the unhealthy expression of the masculine, that's usually a mask for women in order to be able to succeed, produce, and just be part of our culture. When we start to strip those away and we create a solid foundation of that internal masculine, what tends to happen is that the feminine will naturally flower from that place, you know? And we can also see that in, like, I think of this as sort of like an inner union that we're building and cultivating, but we can see that also within a healthy partnership between a man and a woman, right? If a man is embodied in his healthy masculine energy and is holding that containment for the relationship and all of those pieces that I named, then the feminine essence of the woman is going to be able to really shine and thrive.
Yes, that's so true. I mean, it rings so true in my body, and I love that you said that. So, I mean, I feel like this could be a whole topic for a whole episode.
It could be.
Maybe we'll get to do that one day. I would just maybe love to hear a little bit to touch about how we start to heal that masculine or wounded masculine within ourselves because I guess that relates also to connecting to your flow and your feminine energy.
Yeah, totally. So I think that embodying it in a really simple way is, like I mentioned, like really building an ability to hold commitment and trust with ourselves is such a powerful embodiment of that healthy masculine energy. And so, you know, an example of this in a spiritual practice is, like, a lot of the spiritual practices that I teach women are more feminine based. So rather than silent, seated, strict meditation practices, which feel very masculine, we're trying to access pure consciousness from that place. I work with a lot of like more embodiment and somatic and like energy work and things like this, which work with more of that Shakti energy, right?
So like dancing
movement, like really expressing, moving energy through your body, working with Kundalini energy. And so the thing is that what I found is, like, in order to get to that place, it's really helpful to have a foundation of a disciplined masculine meditation practice. Because when we build that masculine foundation, that meditation practice that allows us to access pure consciousness, it holds a container. And then when we want to move into more of that feminine embodiment or Kundalini activation kind of space, we actually want to first, when we do those practices, we want to first tap in to the place of pure consciousness, the part of us that is the witness, the part of us that can observe the energy that's moving. And if we haven't developed that practice first, it can be, again, a little bit chaotic when we move into some of those other practices. So that's one example. Another example could be just building commitments and discipline into your life in really simple ways, you know, with your self-care routine, with like some of the practices that I teach about in like syncing with your menstrual cycle. It's like building commitment and stability within like your meal times or within, you know, the practices that you're doing in order to harmonize with those cycles. And I think just creating some healthy, like very tangible structure in our lives is really, really supportive to then be able to have space to flow within that.
Beautiful. Okay, so I have a lot more to ask you about that, but I want to go to like the main topic of our conversation. And that is really about the embodiment of what I find maybe even the most feminine aspect of our being, which is our
Yes.
menstrual cycle.
Yes, totally.
So you really laid out the whole cycle, the phases, the different phases, and explained what happens in each phase, what is it good for, like what we can enhance, and you know, all that we need to know about our menstrual cycles and how to use them in our advantage.
Yeah, just how to harmonize with them.
Exactly.
I think. Yeah. So for me, this is such a huge piece because it really taps us into the embodied experience of being a woman and being in a feminine body. And, you know, it's such a tangible way to reconnect with our feminine energy. And it's such a tangible way to access our cyclicality. And I think that cyclicality is such an important aspect of the feminine, that death and rebirth process that we move through as women. And for me, that's the process of alchemy. And so we actually get to experience that in a physical way every single month through our menstrual cycle. And I think that, you know, we've all been, again, conditioned into this societal framework that that is not built for a cyclical body. Right. It's built for a 24-hour cycle, which is what a male's hormonal cycle looks like. And so reclaiming this piece is so, so, so important for women. And it's so empowering, and it really does connect you with your femininity in such a big way.
Hey, I'm quickly interrupting the episode to extend an invitation. If you are interested in deepening into any of the subjects we talk about on the podcast, we offer many different experiences on our beautiful grounds here in Baja, Mexico. From 9-day modules such as sound healing and yoga nidra, to breath and meditation, as well as 200 or 300-hour yoga teacher trainings, and many different shorter retreats. Check out our website yandara.com to see all the information about the different experiences. Let's get back to the episode. Thank you for setting that up in that way. I think we should start with like where you started in the workshop.
Awesome. Yeah. So I really like to look at the cycle through 4 phases. And each of those phases are different. And I think of them each as having their own unique gifts. And so rather than being in this place of trying to operate in a 24-hour world, we get to really learn about and harmonize with the gifts of each phase of our cycle and really empower ourselves to access and embody those gifts and work with it in a way that's advantageous to us. So the first phase that I love to start with is our menstruation phase, the bleeding phase of the cycle. And when I speak about our cycle, it's typically between 25 and 35 days for most women. It can be shorter or longer, and usually that could be an indication of some kind of a hormonal imbalance. But the bleeding phase is such a beautiful one to reclaim because it is one that I think has a lot of demonization around it. And the gifts of this phase are some of the most powerful gifts for us to access as women. So this is the phase where I think of the phases as correlated to the seasons of the year or the phases of the moon. So we can think of our bleeding phase as correlated with winter or the new moon or dark moon. And so this energetic is really an inward energy. It's all about hibernation. It's all about going inward, and it's all about really connecting with our internal self. This is the death phase in the cycle, which is why our hyper-productive, forward-moving society doesn't honor and celebrate this phase. But actually, when we tap into the wisdom of the feminine, we learn and understand that we cannot have growth, we cannot have birth without death. It's a requirement of the cycle of life. And so accessing this phase is really, really a revolution, I think, for women. It's about really reclaiming rest. It's about reclaiming our softness. It's about reclaiming our our sovereignty, in our right to take space for ourselves and to really be in our own process and to not be giving. You know, I think there's so much conditioning for women to overgive and to self-sacrifice, and that's a huge piece that I help women with. And so really reclaiming that moment of like internalizing our energy and moving our energy inward and getting to just be in relationship with ourselves and not having to overextend our energy outward. This is really the power of this phase when we reclaim it. And on a physical level, our bodies thrive when we rest during this phase, you know, both through just hormonally, like this is what is most supportive for us at this time, is to really take time to go inward. And when we do that, when we turn off our phones and we don't go to parties and we, you know, spend time in spiritual practice and we like take a bath and like just really rest and really go inward during this time, it's such a superpower, because during this phase we have the most access to our intuition, our psychic gifts, and our connection to spirit. And so, as we know, if we're women with a spiritual practice, it's really hard to connect with spirit when you're like in a busy environment, or your day is go, 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 right? And so having that time every single month to go inward and to create spaciousness around ourselves, it allows that intuitive power to really come online. And just physiologically, we experience an opening in our third eye when our cervix is open during the first day or two of our bleed. And so there's this really, really powerful kind of gift that comes with this phase of having clear inner knowing, of accessing this inner wise woman who knows exactly what needs to die in our lives, who knows exactly what needs to be born, and who just has that inner clarity and wisdom.
It makes me honestly like can't wait for my next bleed.
Right, exactly. It's such a superpower. Like, it's incredible.
Yeah, and it really, really connects with me. Like, we're so used to our bleeding days being something that you need to hide and be embarrassed of and bypass. And really the way that, I mean, I don't mean to be like bashing society or like something like that, but the way that life is built, especially in the more Western world, we try to kind of homogenize all the seasons in order to always be productive, as you mentioned. And, you know, whether it's through taking contraception, and then completely disconnecting from your actual rhythm and cycle, or, you know, all the different ways that we're meant to always be productive. And just that simple realization of the power and meaning of these few days, and how we can, when we learn how to allow space for them, we can really harness this incredible power. It's just so inspiring.
And I think it's such a beautiful mirror of nature. You know, like, we see in our Western culture how we don't hibernate in winter. We're expecting ourselves to continue going. But we see how that's in detriment to both the planet and ourselves as living animals who are part of this planet. You know, like, in nature, in winter, the crops lie fallow. Like, the all of the energy goes down and into the earth and inward, and there's this alchemy that's happening underneath the surface, and from above it looks like everything's dead. It looks like everything's over. But without that process, we can't have the new birth that comes in spring. And it's the same with our bodies, you know.
And our lives.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I feel like so many times we rush and we feel like we're not moving when things are actually just happening under the surface.
Exactly. Yes, totally.
And just like realizing that there are seasons
and cycles.
and cycles allows us to really, really empower. Kitty. We have a little guest here. Okay, so this is our winter, the time of death for the obvious reason of shedding the uterus lining, right?
Exactly.
What is the next phase?
So the next phase of the cycle is our follicular phase, and this would be our inner spring, or the moon is waning during this time or growing. And we're starting to come outward out of our shell during the follicular phase. I always think of this phase, a good indicator, which is kind of a silly thing, but if you've been kind of going really inward during your moon, during your bleed, you kind of go into this moon cave, there's this day around when you finish bleeding that you wake up in the morning and you feel like you have a little spark of energy and you're like, I feel like I just want to dress up and look cute. And like, this is a sign that estrogen is returning.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you can also say the days, because I think that's helpful.
Yeah, totally. So our bleed is typically around 5 days. It could be 3 to 7 roughly, depending on the woman. And so when I recommend for women to track their cycle, which I recommend to everyone, I always recommend starting your tracking with day 1 being the first day that you are fully bleeding. And then you just count up until the next time that you have a first day of your next bleed. And so that will give you kind of the information of your full cycle. And so the follicular phase starts around day 5, depending on the woman. And is typically around like 5 days to a week. And yeah, this is the time when estrogen is building in our system. And so we're starting to move up and outward. And this is a really beautiful time for us to work with that building energy. And so we want to really start to plan things in our life. This is like fertile spring energy. So what seeds are we planting? What are our intentions for this cycle of our lives, this month of our lives? Making a plan, making a to-do list, kind of scheduling out your next month. That's one of the ways that I work with my cycle in my business, especially. You know, I always recommend women who run their own businesses to work with their cycle in terms of their business. If you can, like taking the first day or 2 of your bleed completely off of work. I know not everyone has that luxury, but as much as we can, really resting during that time. And then during the follicular phase, starting to plan and starting to get excited, get inspired, think about new ideas. This is also when we want to start bringing some movement back into our bodies. So like doing gentler exercise, maybe doing some cardio, depending on what your exercise routine looks like. But during the actual bleed phase, it's really important to just rest. It's really important to just be, in stillness and maybe go for a long walk or do some really gentle yin yoga or stretching. But more than that is actually putting your body into a stress response when you're bleeding.
You also mentioned during the class that you gave about the food that we eat during these stages.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what happens like if you don't eat the right foods in that stage?
Yes,
you actually put your body in a stress response rather than...
Absolutely. Yeah. So during our bleed, we need a lot of iron. We're bleeding. Mm-hmm. And so this is if you eat red meat, which I recommend women to eat red meat. I will say that. That's a great time to do that, and just really nourishing foods. Think of winter. So you're eating cooked foods, you're eating warming foods, you're eating nourishing foods. And then when spring comes, we might move into a little bit of lighter foods, right? And so we want to be mindful that these seasons aren't like, there's not a harsh cutoff date where like, okay, on this day, I'm going to stop eating warming foods and I'm going to start eating salads. Like, it's a transition that happens gradually. And I find in the follicular phase, right after we bleed, the kind of one easy mistake to make is to jump into movement too quickly. Mm-hmm. We get energy back. And so we can be like, okay, I'm ready. I have all this energy. Let's go. And we can burn out if we don't kind of pace ourselves. We're not at full peak energy yet, which comes in ovulation. So we just want to be mindful of that and like gently kind of swing into more putting our energy out into the world.
I think just that is such an important thing to realize, and what I really took from your class the other day, that it's a gradual movement that happens. So
yes,
you allow yourself to give space and time for your energy level, which for me means checking in with myself.
Yes, absolutely.
And just seeing what feels that I have the capacity for at that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is a practice that all of us can benefit from, you know, just being in that practice of checking in with ourselves. And everyone's cycle is also going to look different and unique. And so these are kind of some generalized offerings and suggestions and invitations, but many of these I've learned through my own lived experience of just practicing being in harmony with these cycles. So yeah, I really recommend women to practice really tracking their cycle and being in communication with their body and really listening to like, okay, what do I need in this phase? What feels good? Like, how did that feel? I tried that last cycle. How did that feel? Was I burnt out? Okay, maybe I need to go a little slower. You know, just being in that constant practice.
And also it's kind of like a tracking
yes.
your levels throughout the time. And you also gave this example of like, you write the days in your journal.
Yes.
And check in with the past and how it was.
Yes, totally. So women often ask me how to track their cycle. And I always recommend for myself, the easiest way to do it is I have a regular journaling practice. So I journal every day and I always write the date at the top of my journal. And right next to the date, I put the day of my cycle that I'm on. It's a super simple way to track. It doesn't require you to be on your phone or use any technology. And it's also a really beautiful way to track your emotional experience through the different phases of your cycle and really gain wisdom through that. So being able to notice, like, if an emotional pattern is coming up, what day of your cycle you're on, what kind of phase you're in, and then being able to flip back and see last month around this day, what was going on? Was I experiencing a similar emotional cycle? And how can I use that as information, you know?
Yeah, I think that's really wonderful. Really, I can't wait to start journaling and checking and really, because having more knowledge about ourselves is just so empowering, and it gives us a lot of peace, you know, not fighting against where we are and what we need, and rather learning from it and harnessing that power to just, you know, live more comfortably.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've noticed, like, when we are experiencing some kind of an emotional pattern or like struggles internally, like anxiety or depression or like anything like this, it's like we really want to understand what's happening in our lives. What are the ways in which our lives are not supporting us or we're not supporting ourselves, and how that's contributing to those experiences. And so this is a really helpful way to start doing that. There are so many more, but
yeah, that's so true. I think so often we blame ourselves when things are not happening, and we don't look at all the external circumstances that we're dealing with on a daily basis. And for me, that has been really important and meaningful in living a more, let's say, like balanced and fluid life.
Yeah, and living in alignment.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Yeah.
Next phase.
Okay, so then we move into the most fun phase. This is our ovulation, and this is actually when we're fertile. So if we are using our cycle to understand our fertility and to, you know, either choose to prevent or choose to have babies, then we really want to know about when we're ovulating. And if that's something that's new for you, I really recommend checking out, there is an app called Natural Cycles, and you need to take your temperature every single morning in order to work with that app.
Forever?
I recommend, if you are wanting to work with the fertility awareness method as a method of contraception, starting with something like the Natural Cycles app, because if you're not familiar with your body, then you're not going to know right away when you're ovulating. And there are indicators based on your basal body temperature that will tell you when you're ovulating. And that app just has, they've collected so much data from women, so they can really give precision around that information. And as you start to practice that and then learn through tracking your cycle, through being in awareness of your body, and through also following along with the app and being like, okay, that's how I feel when I'm ovulating, you're going to start to know. And so it can be a good kind of introduction to using that method of birth control. But ovulation is when we are fertile, and this is when estrogen is at its peak. So this is when our energy is most upward and outward. It correlates to the summer and the full moon. And so it's really about shining our energy out into the world. Actually, physiologically, our face and our bodies change so much over the course of our cycle. This is another huge piece. It's just understanding like your belly is going to look really different depending on where in your cycle you are. Right. And like not feeling like you have to suck that in all the time, but really realizing like when you're luteal, for example, it's going to be a little more round. You know, when we're ovulating, however, our physical body responds by being the most attractive it can be. And this is to call in a mate, right? Biologically. And so we look beautiful, we feel shiny, and we want to go out into the world and share our energy with others. So this is a really beautiful time to schedule lots of social things. We have the most energy here, so packing our schedule. In terms of working with our cycle, if you have your own business, you know, doing things like recording a podcast when you're ovulating, you're going to feel great. You're going to feel confident. You're going to want to share your face, your voice. Like if you have to do things like public speaking, you know, scheduling those when you're ovulating, important meetings, launches, like anything where you're putting your energy up and out into the world. Really working with that ovulation energy can be really powerful, and really making sure that your schedule is like lively and exciting and filled with fun during this time is really important. It's a great time to go out dancing with your girlfriends, you know. It can be a really great time to go on dates as well. I do recommend some caution there, because estrogen is a people-pleasing hormone. And so when we have peak estrogen in our system, we are most likely to really just be in that like go with the flow, like everything's good kind of energy, which is amazing. And it doesn't necessarily promote the same amount of discernment. And so having a first date when we're ovulating, we're going to feel really confident. We're going to feel really beautiful and really radiant. Our libido is high, you know, so we also maybe want to exercise caution around that. But there is the fourth phase that which we'll go into next, where discernment is really high. And so working with that as well, I think is important when we're dating.
Try to date the person throughout the whole cycle. And then
I mean, totally, right? Because when you're ovulating, you're going to feel great. You're going to feel excited. When you're luteal, you're going to feel really discerning, and like maybe underlying emotions will come to the surface. When you're on your bleed, your intuition's really strong. So that's a great time to assess a potential suitor. There are benefits for sure in all the phases.
Good. So decision making, not during ovulation.
Maybe not. Yeah. Maybe not like choosing a person during that moment, but it's definitely a good, you know, time to put yourself out there and let yourself be seen. It's like we feel so radiant as women when we're ovulating. And I think it's another big part of reclaiming the feminine is like reclaiming that desire to be radiant and to be witnessed and to be celebrated in that radiance.
I love that. Beautiful. Okay, that was the ovulation phase.
Yes,
Sounds fun.
I feel we should also talk about like a little bit of just exercise and diet around that phase. So this is when physically we have our peak performance. So if you're an athlete or you're training in some capacity, this is when you want to do your most intense physical training. Your body has your body's performance is at its peak at this time. So you want to do the hardest exercise that you do all month long during that phase. And this is a time where we want to eat more summer foods. So like lighter foods, maybe if you like things like salads and smoothies, this would be the time to incorporate those. Still making sure we get like lots of protein. That's a big one for women. But yeah, that would be how I would work with that physically as well.
Wonderful. Cool.
And then,
so let's go to the fourth and final stage.
Yeah, so last but not least is the luteal phase. And this is our longest phase. This is when estrogen starts to drop and progesterone is rising. And this phase gets a lot of a bad reputation as well. This is our PMS phase before we bleed again. And it's actually a really important one to work with. And I think reclaiming it is so important because as estrogen drops, that people-pleasing hormone, we have a greater capacity to access our discernment and our boundaries. And so when boundaries are being crossed, when we're ovulating, we might not mind. But when boundaries are being crossed and we're luteal, we're gonna mind. And it's actually not going to be okay with us. And so I think that, you know, as women, I mean, there's a lot of conditioning to be kind of subservient and submissive. And I think that's why we have that like PMS story around a woman who's about to bleed. It's actually like that woman is standing in her discernment and understanding when her boundaries are being crossed and having a really strong bullshit detector.
And that's being called like problematic.
Yeah,
of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so working with this phase, you know, I really recommend connecting with your boundaries and connecting with your discernment. And like if there's something in your life that over and over again comes up when you're luteal as something that doesn't feel good for you, that's a really strong indication that your body is telling you that during your bleed, it wants you to release that thing from your life. And so if there's a relationship, for example, and it feels good most of the month, but every time you go into that luteal place, you question it, or you don't feel good, or you don't feel seen or heard, or your needs aren't getting met, like that's your discernment coming online and really trying to tell you something important.
That's so important. First of all, to know that you're in this phase, and then to know that when you're in this phase and you have this feeling about something in your life, this is the time when you are most capable of really, truly seeing the truth of what it is.
Yes. And I mean, I would take it with a grain of salt. Like we can definitely have emotional moments during our luteal phase where we're like, everything's falling apart and I'm questioning my whole business, you know?
Okay.
And like, yeah, that can happen. But I think if it's a pattern, cycle after cycle, you're questioning the same thing. And you've noticed like every time I hit this place in my cycle, I don't feel good around this one thing in my life. That's important information. And there's probably a boundary that's being crossed. And so there's probably a boundary that needs to be set there.
Okay. And then by tracking your cycle and really knowing which day you're in, which phase you're in, and then going back and checking that, even if you're like questioning something, you're not sure if it has come up before, going back and seeing.
Exactly.
That's why it's so important.
That's why it's so important. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So how to work with this phase, everything that I just mentioned. And then also in terms of our work in the world, the first part of this phase, this is a longer phase. So we tend to ovulate around day 10 to 15, somewhere in that range. So our luteal phase can be, 10 days or more. And so it's a longer phase. And in the earlier parts of this phase, I really like to use this phase to complete the things that I set as intentions during the follicular phase. So if you've used your follicular phase to make a list and make a plan and figure out your goals for this month, then this is where it can be actually really, really difficult to make decisions during the luteal phase for me personally. But I found if I've done my homework in follicular, then I can use that list and really like get shit done. It's like completion energy. It's just task orientation. You know, there are things we all have to do in our life that just are a little bit of mindless tasks, like just things that need to get done, administrative things. And so this is a great time to really just check off your list, use that estrogen that's still in the system, and like there's endurance in this phase. So using that endurance energy to do household chores, financial chores, administrative chores, just wrapping things up. And then in the second part of the luteal phase, kind of as we start to get more towards the bleed and we start rounding out that cycle, the last, 3 to 5 days of the cycle, I really like to start bringing the energy down, winding inward, again, taking more rest, coming back to center, more self-care, lots of nourishment is needed in this phase. So physically also, we want to be really, really nourishing the body during this phase. I've seen so many women complain, I don't know why I'm so hungry. And they're luteal and their body needs more food. Physically, you need more food during this phase than when you are ovulating or follicular. And so feeding yourself more is really important and listening to that, because when you don't, and you try to eat the same way that you were eating a week or two ago, your body is going to perceive that as a physical stress, that you're starving and you don't have enough nourishment. And so your body then starts to want to store fat and want to store energy because it feels in a stress response. So really nourishing the body during this time is super, super important. This is when cravings can come up for a lot of women. So having healthy kinds of foods that feel like comfort foods is really important, like making sweet potato brownies or like something that feels really nourishing and comforting is really great. And then in the earlier part of this phase, our exercise can move towards more endurance kinds of trainings. And then towards the end of the luteal phase, we want to move into more of that gentle long walks, yin yoga, things like this.
Beautiful. So it sounds to me that kind of in the follicular ovulation, it's more of the masculine energy, it's right? Of making the structures and like getting things done.
Yes.
And then the luteal and the bleed are the times where we're more in the feminine energy.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Amazing. Okay, I mean, we completed the cycle. What an incredible cycle that we have, and how much of a privilege it is. I mean, it's basic, but just to be able to hear this from you and learn about something that we should know more about.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you think is important to mention, or like a perspective, an approach, practices that you think are important?
I think the practice it's a cyclical practice, right? And so we can try to approach this practice in a really rigid way. I've definitely been guilty of this. Be like, okay, I'm going to master my cycle, and like, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. And
masculine energy.
Very masculine approach to a very feminine cycle. And I find that the feminine tends to rebel against that. And so if you do try to approach this in a really like hyper-structured way like that, you'll find like your bleed will come 2 weeks late or 2 weeks early, and like it'll just throw you off. You'll be like, but I planned all of this to bleed, and then it didn't happen the way that I wanted, And so just being really gentle with ourselves in the process, and really being in this reciprocal relationship with our bodies, and listening and just learning through just the lived experience of it. I think that is the most powerful wisdom that comes here. And I will say, like, if you notice that you have, you know, a struggle with a certain phase of your cycle, then it's like, okay, look back on what were you doing in the prior phases of that same cycle. Were you supporting and nourishing each of those phases in the ways that your body needed? You know, I'll find that, for example, I'll experience, I can tend to experience more pain with my bleed if I wasn't really nourishing myself and slowing down enough, or if I wasn't setting the correct boundaries during my luteal phase.
Really?
And so I'm really aware of that. You know, I'm also aware that if my body is moving through a big death and rebirth process, we're all constantly going through death and rebirth, but some of them are bigger than others. And sometimes my body has a lot to release energetically. And so that can be a more challenging bleed cycle. And I'm aware of that. And so how can I tend to my body even more during that phase, you know?
Yeah, what an incredible thing just to like that our body does. It literally releases the unnecessary things from the body, and that's way more than just the physicality of it.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, this is, for me, it's such a spiritual practice, being in harmony with these cycles.
Yeah, the reason I've been speaking about this so much on the podcast is because I find that really connecting to our feminine power is one of the most nourishing and wholesome thing that we can do, not only for ourselves, but for the world.
Yes, for the planet.
For the planet that is in such a dire need for some nurturing and love.
Yes.
So I'm so grateful for you and for sharing this your work, this knowledge. I really am looking forward to updating you on my cycle.
Yes, please do.
Just to wrap it up, unless you think there's anything else that's important, okay? The question I always ask is, what are you curious about right now?
I'm really curious about the ways in which we can embark on our healing journey and our journey of reclaiming our authentic selves through a sense of joy and lightness and play, and without feeling like that process always has to be difficult or challenging or take us through suffering.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Hannah, thank you so much. I've learned so much. Even hearing it again, you know, you take more things, you get more familiar with it, and I'm just fascinated and grateful.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Now, after this time to nurture your mind and your spirit, we invite you to take a moment to consider others. A kind wish might come to mind. Know that what we learn becomes more valuable when we apply it and share it with others. So share this episode on Instagram stories, tag Yandara and I, or share with a loved one so that more people can benefit from it. Our hope is that the search will lead you home, to who you already are, to what was always there. We'll be back next week with more inspiration, honest conversation, and insight into the energetic world around us. Thank you for listening and watching.